Hey guys, welcome to the Florida Gardener podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. So Roots Redefined, my garden and floral business, is headed into its 4th year, and I thought it'd be a great time to reflect and share what I've learned throughout this journey. This episode is going to be a combination of helpful tips for you in the garden and interesting insights into the plant and floral industries. Sort of like pulling the curtain back on some things you may not have been aware of. I have a ton to share, so we're going to break this up into 2 separate episodes. This is part 1 of 2. All right, so let's get started. Lesson number 1, know your nurseries. There are many types of garden centers and nurseries. Some focus on annual bedding flowers, others on larger plant materials such as trees and foundation shrubs. And we also have nurseries that specialize in tropicals and interior foliage. You'll also have different experiences at these places depending on how they're structured. Some are hands-off, while others will guide you through the entire plant process. That's really interesting. It's helpful to know where to go and what to expect. So essentially, there are nurseries and garden centers that are catered toward you, the retail customer. They are pretty, and usually the staff are willing to answer questions, helping you to select the perfect plant for your landscape. It's usually easy to walk around these garden centers and everything is labeled. They have clearly designated pathways for the customer. These nurseries and garden centers are usually a bit more expensive. But hey, you get what you pay for, right? Then there are wholesale nurseries. While many are wholesale only, i.e. only available to people in the industry, there are some that are open to the retail shopper as well. It can be like the Wild West sometimes here. These nurseries don't usually charge as much, but they also rely on large landscape companies coming through their truck and trailer and ordering a ton of plant material. These nurseries usually operate a bit differently. You pay, load up, and get out. They ain't there to answer your questions. Now, that's not to say they won't help you. These folks are great, and they can definitely lend a hand, and if you need help loading up, they are there to do it. But you need to show up with a plan. I often see folks go to these nurseries and they are badgering the guy on the golf cart who doesn't speak a lot of English, asking what pink flowers will work best in their backyard, under their cabana with the blue pot. And I just feel for this guy because he's just over there doing his thing, potting up 100 1-gallon pentas. And anyway, I digress. So wholesale nurseries can also be very large. They're usually a much bigger area to walk through than a retail garden center. You're not taking a leisurely stroll with your iced latte. You need a plan. Also, make sure you're wearing proper footwear. The wholesale nurseries don't always have pretty pathways. It can be dirty, wet, slippery, especially when you're walking through rows of plants on plastic weed barriers. This is definitely something I didn't totally understand. So I didn't really have a good understanding of the wholesale process when I first started Roots. I felt very overwhelmed. Like I said, you need to have a pretty good idea of what you're getting before you show up. Now I always have a list of what I need. I grab a golf cart and I load up. But with all of this being said, the plants here are usually less expensive. Of course, they are offered at a discount for the wholesale folks, but often I'll see that they are less expensive even without that discount for retail. The trade-off? You don't always get as much support, or they'll have folks on to help, but they're spread thin and trying to help those larger landscape clients because that's where the money is at. But instead of being frustrated, just understand that they are not designed that way. And if you want more help or a prettier stroll, you probably want to go to that retail focused spot. That being said, I've run into some retail nurseries that are not great. There is a really big one near me, and I've been surprised. They can be kind of unwelcoming, and if you ask them a question, they are annoyed or I just don't know. When you're paying what you're paying to go to that kind of place and when they advertise themselves the way they do, and I'm even on their newsletter, and it's just interesting when the experience when I go in there doesn't really add up to everything else. So I just have a quick example, and then I promise we're going to move on to lesson number 2. Lately, I'm really into roses, just kind of having fun while the humidity is a little bit lower in my own garden. So I went there recently and asked them if they carry knockout roses. And she was really against knockout, said that they don't do well here, they don't carry them, blah, blah, blah. So she showed me where the roses are that they do have, and there was one that I really liked, but the label just said pink rose. So I asked her what type of rose it was, and she said, I don't know, they just came in like that. And she wasn't even like offering to go and check, so I didn't bother, right? I kind of knew I was on my own with this. And it just kind of bothered me because, like, why wouldn't I just go to Walmart and buy it then, you know? It irked me. If you want people to support your business and you're going to charge a massive premium, at the very least, you should know what you're carrying, especially when it comes to something like a rose. They aren't known for doing well in Florida, and I'm in South Florida on top of that. Only particular varieties do well here. It's not like we're talking about different types of croton varieties or something that's very common and fail-proof. So that really bothered me. But I'm not gonna lie, I still bought it. A few days later, I got one of their newsletters and I decided to email and, follow up and see if anybody knew about the rose, and I didn't get a response. Ironically, about a month later, I was back at that garden center for something else, and guess what I ended up seeing there? Knockout roses, the exact kind that lady told me they don't ever carry, that she was just so against. So all I'm saying is retail nurseries can be hit or miss. They're not always really informed and provide that experience that you think you're paying for. And then on the other hand, there are some really wonderful wholesale nurseries that will open their arms graciously to you. So I actually prefer the wholesale experience because it's more upfront and direct, kind of like what you see is what you get. But then again, on a Saturday morning sometimes, I just want to be a girl and have fun and go to these pretty retail nurseries. So it just depends, but it's definitely something important to understand and to keep in mind. All right, lesson number 2, sneaky plant rotations. Okay, so I find this next one especially true with indoor arrangements. For example, if you see small succulents on tables at a restaurant and they always look good, it's not because there's some magical fertilizer or a plant fairy coming in at night. It's because the plants are swapped out, usually on a bi-weekly or monthly basis. Another great example of this is hotels and airports. Especially here in Florida, you might see some large interior palms with beautiful Guzmania bromeliads surrounding the base of the pot. For those that don't know, the Guzmania bromeliads are the ones with the striking large flowers that protrude out of the center. The flowers are usually red, orange, or yellow. Now, if you look closer, chances are you'll notice the bromeliads or the pothos, whatever smaller plants they are dressing up the base of the pot with, are in their plastic nursery pots. And the plastic pots are probably covered with Spanish moss so that you can't tell. But keeping these small accent plants in their plastic growers pots makes it easy to, you guessed it, swap them out with fresh bromeliads each month. The same goes with orchid arrangements. Folks tend to think they bloom all year, but the truth is these orchids that you see in the hotel lobby are switched out every 4 weeks. Lesson number 3, irrigation always fails. Look, I don't care if it's drip or overhead, you're bound to run into issues. I find this especially true with drip. Don't get me wrong, a drip line is more effective than overhead, and I absolutely appreciate that. But I have yet to do a job that doesn't have issues with their drip system. Usually the drip line gets clogged. Now, I'm certainly not an irrigation tech, so I'm not going to dive too much into this, but soaker hoses really intrigue me for this reason. They have their limitations, but I appreciate that they don't get clogged. I also love Ollas, Ollas, which is essentially underground irrigation using ceramic pottery. It's been around for a long time. It's an ancient technique. These vessels are made from clay, so they're very porous. Size and shape can vary a little bit, but some of the main ones that you'll find online today usually have a round, wide base and then a long, narrow neck, sort of like a flower vase, if you will. Anyway, you fill it with water and then plant it in the soil, leaving only the top exposed. These are not usually for the landscape. They're best used in raised beds and large pots. The walls of the Oya slowly releases moisture into the soil, which the plant roots absorb. Pretty cool. And I also appreciate just hand watering and relying on Mother Nature. We're lucky here in Florida. Rain is not scarce. Not to say that we don't go through periods of occasional drought, but overall, water is plentiful. If we were in California, I might not be singing the same tune, but here in Florida, large containers can absolutely get away without a proper irrigation system, depending on what you plant, especially if you mulch. Mulch is your best friend for moisture retention. Can't recommend it enough. Okay, moving on. Lesson number 4, proper plant selection. Picking the right plants will solve half your problems. I don't think we need to spend too much time on this one, but planting hydrangeas in a central or South Florida landscape is like stalking Lake Okeechobee with rainbow trout and wondering why they don't survive. Enough said. But it does go a little bit further than that. We all know not to plant a full sun plant in the shade or vice versa, but I remember in the beginning, I'd be really smitten by this specific type of calathea or a really fun elephant ear, and I've just realized that there's a reason why landscapers use the plants that they use and why we consistently see them in the landscape. Now, not to say that we couldn't be pushing the boundaries sometimes and being a little bit more creative with the plants that we use, but unless a client is super hung up on a specific type of plant, I am going to use something that I know will stand the test of time and continue to perform in the landscape. This isn't just picking out a plant for your windowsill. When you're doing these large projects for a client and they expect them to look good year-round, you totally just have a different perspective on, what that means, especially when you're doing the maintenance like I do. So I see these plants throughout the entire year, different seasons, different elements, the different weather conditions, and you really start to appreciate, hey, like a macho fern is really freaking hardy. Things that you might take for granted, you don't when you're day in and day out with these plants and, seeing how well they can perform. Not to say that I don't enjoy experimenting, but it's just a little bit different when you're doing it as a business is all I would say. And I think I'm at a point where I prefer to be creative with the way in which I design a container. I tend to prefer the hardy plants that I know are going to do well in the landscape, and then just be really creative with how you arrange them in the container. Because how you arrange them and what you mix together is really how you can make a profound statement. It's like I always say, there are no bad plants, just bad landscapes. And the same thing applies to container design as well. Lesson number 5, proactive care. Having a consistent and proactive approach with maintenance is huge. I remember being very worried that I would just show up for maintenance one day and all the plants in my client space would be dead or totally destroyed by some major pest outbreak. Great news. These things don't usually sneak up on us. Typically, nature gives us a heads up. We just usually fail to pay attention to these early warning signs. And the next thing you know, Carol is on her Facebook gardening group page crying about how caterpillars decimated her oleander. And out of nowhere, can you believe that? It's like magic. Within 24 hours, no more. These tiny little caterpillars ate her entire 6-foot-tall oleander plant. I swear, true story. Lesson number 6 is function. Another one that I really struggled with. So don't look at Pinterest. That's all I have to say. Function and logistics over everything. Aesthetics is after that. When I first started Roots, I was guilty of obsessing over Pinterest and coming up with these wild ideas, just like the rest of us. But I learned very quickly that sure, you can dabble when it's your own home, but when it's for a client, you better know what you're doing. And that's why I just can't with some of these people on social. Half the stuff I see would just never fly for a commercial client. But you have some girl doing it in her home and you think, oh yeah, this is totally possible. Starting Roots really helped me think through these things. After years of installs and maintenance, not only am I there to set it all up, but I also am there to see if it can actually perform. The wall-mounted planter or the plants in the landscape, I'm there to deal with whatever happens next. So doing that, I understand not only what that succulent wall, hanging basket, or container garden will look like today, but also in a year. It's not just about installing something that looks pretty now, but also in 6 months, a year, and 5 years. How will it hold up with kids pulling on the plants, customers, guests using them as an ashtray, storms, extreme heat, cold, the dry air inside our buildings, and even things you wouldn't think about? I do a lot of work for shopping centers, and there's always something going on. Property management is cleaning, painters, pressure washing, trimming massive palm frond leaves. Sometimes plants can be hurt in the process. I guess the best way to say it is pre-Roots, Pinterest and these other images were just like eye candy to me. Sort of like building your dream home, but without giving any thought to the boring stuff. How old is the roof? Does it have impact windows? Is it on city water or septic? Does the location really make sense? Just not really thinking it through. And now I can't see past the quote unquote boring stuff. Literally the first things that come to mind are, how hardy is this plant? Will it hold up in full sun? Will it hold up in this breezeway with all of that wind coming through? Okay, that's up on a shelf. I'm going to be up and down the ladder. Is it going to get dusty? Where's the freight elevator? If there's no irrigation, where is the water access? Once I have an understanding of all of that, then I can start dream building, but that doesn't happen until the foundation is laid. On a side note, now that when I do go plant shopping for myself, it's like such a fun, liberating thing because I give myself permission not to think about function and just be reckless. So I'll just go on impulse, say, like I'm doing right now with the roses, right? And it just gives me this opportunity to try out new stuff, sort of like having my own trial garden. That way the client isn't the guinea pig. It's a totally newfound freedom. All right, and that brings us into number 7, logistics. Another thing that I wasn't really great about thinking through before starting Roots, but hey, you're not pulling out that massive shrub, and please get the smaller bag of soil. Anything done repetitively is going to get exhausting, so either get help or opt for the smaller size. This comes with plants at the garden center too. Most of my plants are 1 or 3 gallon plant material. Sometimes I'll do a 7 gallon, but that's rare. To give you an idea, a 1 gallon plant has about a 6-inch diameter and a 3 gallon plant has a 10-inch diameter. I don't like to go much larger than this because it's just going to get difficult for me to handle, especially when they're root bound. So, funny story about logistics. I remember in the beginning, I got a Majesty palm for a client. It was 7 feet tall and probably like in a 15 gallon container. I don't know. It was really, really big. I struggled so much getting that thing into the bed of my truck and then to the job. Even with a dolly, it was dang near impossible. But going back to the Pinterest thing, I was so focused on having this huge, lush palm inside, and I didn't think about the logistics. Now I structure my business a bit differently. For the most part, I like to keep things small and within my scope. But when necessary, I'll work with a contractor to get larger stuff done. But for the most part, it's just about being realistic and then being upfront with the client. Today, if a client had requested that palm, I would say, hey, I can't do that, but I can install a 3 gallon, 5-foot palm in a tall woven cotton basket. Then we can discreetly elevate the pot by adding some pavers inside the base of the basket. You also need to understand what type of business you're going after and what you want to be known for. I don't install large plant material, and I don't want to be known for that because then I'm just going to attract that type of business. So know what you're good at and what you can easily repeat if another customer wants something similar. Think about what's sustainable long term. Lesson number 8, a very, very humbling lesson. plan for the unexpected. Oh man, just so many good lessons. My job before Roots was sitting in front of a computer, talking to clients about their 401k plans and helping them with payroll. I didn't deal with the elements. So to go from that to dealing with storms, high winds, intense heat, pest pressure, diseases, inconsiderate patrons. I mean, leaving shot glasses and beer bottles in these containers, stolen plants. I mean, it has just been nuts. And then throw on top of all of that, just like standard stuff that's like pressure washing and stuff around my plants, and just sometimes how they end up getting destroyed because of someone else doing their job and, not meaning to. And yes, people will literally steal plants out of the pots. So it has just been very humbling. And I think in the beginning, I always just thought, okay, well, after I fix this one thing, then I won't have any more issues. And no, it's just embracing that every time. Every time you go to the job, there's probably going to be something to fix. But that's also why they're paying you and why your service is valued. So just having a different perspective on that. The 9th lesson that I've learned is fail-proof plants will fail you and you will not know why. So, and something I recently heard Kevin from Epic Gardening say is the best gardeners have killed the most plants. And I just think that's true. I have been very shocked. I think I got to a point where I felt like I kind of knew what's going to perform the best. Because there are plants that are just known to be very hardy, and there's other plants that, it's kind of hit or miss. But every time I think that I've got it down, Mother Nature just shows me that I am wrong. So and I think too, though, it's a number, like the more of something you plant, they say to kind of always prepare for like a 10% loss or something like that. So part of it's just scale. The more I plant of something, you're going to have times where it doesn't always work out. And you're dealing with Mother Nature and her coming through and doing her thing. That has been very humbling as well. So the 10th lesson I've learned is kind of understanding that each client has their own thing that they're like very focused on or will notice more when it comes to the plants that I maintain for them. So what I mean by that is I'll have some clients that they're hyper focused on the interiors and they're not as picky when it comes to, what the outside looks like, or it could be the other way around. And I think a funny example is like I one time had a client where we created this like whole green wall for them outside, and there were these mandevilla vines that were supposed to be wrapping around these palms, and they were really struggling, and it was very, very obvious to me, and I was like, gosh, I need to fix this. Well, next thing you know, the client's worried about the bird's nest ferns, which are on these wall-mounted planters, and they didn't say a thing about the mandevilla vine. And to me, it was just blatantly obvious that the mandevilla was struggling and the bird's nest fern was fine. It was just going through a little bit of shock, but that's all they could see. So that was something that I learned, over these last few years, as well as what's important to you may not be important to them, and just kind of understanding, obviously everything, should look good, and that should be the goal, but understanding what's really important to your client versus what are you very fixated on. And number 11, this is going to be the last one for today, is understanding that, I went into a male-dominant industry, and men have been overall like great to work with and really supportive. And surprisingly, I want to say if I have run into issues, they've typically been with females. And there's only been really one big issue, and that was with a woman. And it was at a nursery, and she did not want to sell me plants as a wholesaler. She did not believe that I was a legitimate business. Even though I provided her my business card, my FEIN number, and my website. And she kept, and I asked her, I was like, well, do you have like a minimum? Is that the reason why? And she said, no, it's just, she couldn't give me a reason as to why. And what it came down to, and I'm not the kind of person just to kind of like throw this stuff out, but it was absolutely true in this case, is it was sexism. And I did not look like the type of landscape, right? I'm a small, young woman and I pull up in my van and load it up. I'm not this like rough landscaper with a trailer, doing that whole thing. And she truly was just like kind of sizing me up or doing whatever. And I didn't fit her mold of what a professional in this space should look like. And I do want to highlight the fact that she's a woman with a small business and I'm a woman with a small business. So the irony. And I just got to say that like typically with guys, it's just, if you can do the job or you can't, and they don't care. Like, you know what I mean? And I think guys take a lot of heat. So I wanted to throw that out there. I appreciate all the women that have supported me throughout this journey. There have been a ton. But I really just wanted to highlight the fact that like, there are a lot of great guys in this field, and being in a male dominant industry does not mean that they're not open and welcoming to women being in the industry. Just wanted to throw that out there. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed episode 18 and kind of getting a sneak peek behind Roots and some of the lessons that I've learned over the years. We'll be back soon with episode 19, which will be the second half of the lessons I've learned starting a gardening business. So if you're interested in part 2, that'll be next time. And until then, feel free to check out my website, rootsredefined.com. If you're interested in, learning more or visiting my social, or even downloading a garden design plan, all of that's available through my website, Roots, ROOTS, redefined, REDEFINED.com. All right, thanks guys. I'll see you again soon.